Chapter 11 History of the Old Woman. I had not always bleared eyes and red eyelids, neither did my nose always touch my chin, nor was I always a servant. I am the daughter of Pope Urban X and of the Princess of Palestrina. Until the age of 14, I was brought up in a palace, to which all the castles of your German barons would scarcely have served for stables, and one of my robes was worth more than all the magnificence of Westphalia. As I grew up, I improved in beauty, wit, and every graceful accomplishment. In the midst of pleasure, hopes, and respectful homage, already I inspired love. My throat was formed, and such a throat, white, firm, and shaped like that of the Venus of Medici. And what eyes, what eyelids, what black eyebrows! Such flames darted from my dark pupils that they eclipsed the scintillation of the stars. As I was told by a poet, in our part of the world, my waiting woman, when dressing and undressing me, used to fall into an ecstasy, whether they viewed me before or behind. How glad would the gentleman have been to perform that office for them! I was affianced to the most excellent prince of Massa Carrara, such a prince, as handsome as myself, sweet-tempered, agreeable, brilliantly witty, and sparkling with love. I loved him as one loves for the first time, with idolatry, with transport. The nuptials were prepared. There was surprising pomp and magnificence. There were fetes, carousals, continual opera bouffe, and all Italy composed sonnets in my praise, though not one of them was passable. I was just upon the point of reaching the summit of bliss when an old marchioness, who had been mistress to the prince, my husband, invited him to drink chocolate with her. He died in less than 2 hours of most terrible convulsions. But this is only a bagatelle. My mother, in despair and scarcely less afflicted than myself, determined to absent herself for some time from so fatal a place. She had a very fine estate in the neighborhood of Gaeta. We embarked on board a galley of the country, which was gilded like the great altar of St. Peter's at Rome. A Sei corsair swooped down and boarded us. Our men defended themselves like the Pope's soldier. They flung themselves upon their knees, and they threw down their arms, begging of the corsair an absolution in articulo mortis. Instantly they were stripped as bare as monkeys. My mother, our maids of honor, and myself were all served in the same manner. It is amazing with what expedition those gentry undress people. But what surprised me most was that they thrust their fingers into the parts of our bodies which the generality of women suffer no other instrument but pipes to enter. It approached to me a very strange kind of ceremony, but thus one judges of things when one has not seen the world. I afterwards learned that it was to try whether we had concealed any diamonds. This is the practice established from the time immemorial. Among civilized nations that scour the seas, I was informed that the very religious Knights of Malta never fail to make this search when they take any Turkish prisoners of either sex. It is a law of nations from which they never deviate. I need to tell you how great a hardship it was for a young princess and her mother to be made slaves and carried to Morocco. You may easily imagine all we had to suffer on board the private vessel. My mother was still very handsome, our maids of honor, and even our waiting women had more charms than are to be found in all Africa. As for myself, I was ravishing, was exquisite, grace itself, and I was a virgin. I did not remain so long. This flower, which had been reserved for the handsome prince of Massa Carrara, was plucked by the corsair captain. He was an abominable Negro, and yet believed that he did me a great deal of honor. Certainly, the Princess of Palestrina and myself must have been very strong to go through all that we experienced until our arrival at Morocco. But let us pass on. These are such common things as not to be worth mentioning. Morocco swam in blood when we arrived. 50 sons of the Emperor Muley Ismail had each their adherents. This produced 50 civil wars of blacks against blacks, and blacks against Tonys, and Tonys against Tonys, and mulattoes against mulattoes. In short, it was a continual carnage throughout the empire. No sooner were we landed than the blacks of a contrary faction to that of my captain attempted to rob him of his booty. Next to jewels and gold, we were the most valuable things he had. I was witness to such a battle as you have never seen in your European climate. The northern nations have not that heat in their blood, nor that raging lust for woman, so common in Africa. It seems that you Europeans have only milk in your veins, but it is vitriol. It is fire which runs in those of the inhabitants of Mount Altas and the neighboring countries. They fought with the fury of the lions, tiger, and serpents of the country to see who should have us. A Moor seized my mother by the right arm, while my captain's lieutenant held her by the left. A Moorish soldier had hold of her by one leg, and one of our corsairs held her by the other. Thus almost all our women were drawn in quarters by 4 men. My captain concealed me behind him, and with his drawn scimitar cut and slashed everyone that opposed his fury. At length I saw all our Italian women and my mother herself torn, mangled, massacred by the monsters who disputed over them. The slaves, my companions, those who had taken them, soldiers, sailors, blacks, whites, mulattoes, and at last my captain, all were killed, and I remained dying on a heap of dead. Such scenes as this were transacted through an extent of 300 leagues, and yet they never missed the 5 prayers a day ordained by Mohammed. With difficulty I disengaged myself from such a heap of slaughtered bodies, and crawled to a large orange tree on the bank of a neighboring rivulet, where I fell, oppressed with fright, fatigue, horror, despair, and hunger. Immediately after, my senses, overpowered, gave themselves up to sleep, which was yet more swooning than repose. I was in this state of weakness and insensibility between life and death, when I felt myself pressed by something that moved upon my body. I opened my eyes and saw a white man of good countenance who signed, and who said between his teeth,
"Oh, che sciagura d'essere senza coglioni."
Chapter 12. The adventures of the old woman continued. Astonished and delighted to hear my native language, and no less surprised at what this man said, I made answer that there were much greater misfortunes than that of which he complained. I told him in a few words of the horrors which I had endured, and fainted a second time. He carried me to a neighboring house, put me to bed, gave me food, waited upon me, consoled me, flattered me, He told me that he had never seen anyone so beautiful as I, and that he never so much regretted the loss of what it was impossible to recover. I was born at Naples, said he. There they get out 2 or 3 thousand children every year. Some die of the operation, others acquire a voice more beautiful than that of woman, and others are raised to the office of state. This operation was performed on me with great success, and I was chapel musician to Madame, the Princess of Palestrina. To my mother, cried I. Your mother, cried he, weeping. What? Can you be that young princess whom I brought up until the age of 6 years, and who promised so early to be as beautiful as you? It is I, indeed, but my mother lies 400 yards hence, torn in quarters, under a heap of dead bodies. I told him all my adventures, and he made me acquainted with his, telling me that he had been sent to the Emperor of Morocco by a Christian power, to conclude a treaty with that prince, in consequence of which he was to be furnished with military stores and ships to help to demolish the commerce of other Christian governments. My mission is done, said this honest eunuch. I go to embark for Ceuta and will take you to Italy.
Ma che sciagura d'essere senza coglioni.
I thanked him with tears of commiseration, and instead of taking me to Italy, he conducted me to Algiers, where he sold me to the day. Scarcely was I sold, than the plague which had made the tour of Africa, Asia, and Europe broke out with great malignancy in Algiers. You have seen earthquakes, but pray, miss, have you ever had the plague? Never, answered Cunegonde. If you had, said the old woman, you will acknowledge that it is far more terrible than an earthquake. It is common in Africa, and I caught it. Imagine to yourself the distressed situation of the daughter of a pope, only 15 years old, who, in less than 3 months, had felt the miseries of poverty and slavery, had been ravished almost every day, had beheld her mother drowned in quarters, had experienced famine and war, and was dying of the plague in Algiers. I did not die, however, but my eunuch and the Dey and almost the whole seraglio of Algiers perished. As soon as the first fury of this terrible pestilence was over, a sale was made of the Dey's slaves. I was purchased by a merchant and carried to Tunis. This man sold me to another merchant, who sold me again to another at Tripoli. From Tripoli, I was sold to Alexandria, from Alexandria to Smyrna, and from Smyrna to Constantinople. At length, I became the property of an Aga of the Janissaries, who was soon ordered away to defense of Azov, then besieged by the Russians. The Aga, who was a very gallant man, took his whole seraglio with him and lodged us in a small fort on the Palace Miltiades, guarded by 2 black eunuchs and 20 soldiers. The Turks killed prodigious numbers of the Russians, but the latter had their revenge. Azov was destroyed by fire, the inhabitants put to the sword. Neither sex nor age was spared until there remained only our little fort, and the enemy wanted to starve us out. The 20 Janissaries had sworn they would never surrender. The extremities of famine to which they were reduced obliged them to eat our 2 eunuchs, for fear of violating their oath, and at the end of a few days they resolved also to devour the woman. We had a very pious and humane imam, who preached an excellent sermon, exhorting them not to kill us all at once. Only cut off a buttock of each of those ladies, said he, and you will fare extremely well. If you must go to it again, There will be the same entertainment a few days hence. Heaven will accept of so charitable an action, and send you relief. He had great eloquence. He persuaded them. We underwent this terrible operation. The Imam applied the same balsam to us, as he does to children after circumcision, and we are all nearly died. Scarcely had the Janissaries finished the repast with which we had furnished them, than the Russians came in flat-bottomed boats. Not a Janissary escaped. The Russians paid no attention to the condition we were in. There are French surgeons in all parts of the world. One of them, who was very clever, took us under his care. He cured us. And as long as I live, I shall remember that as soon as my wounds were healed, he made proposals to me. He bid us all be of good cheer, telling us that delight had happened in many sieges, and that it was according to the laws of war. As soon as my companions could walk, they were obliged to set out for Moscow. I fell to the share of a boyar who made me his gardener, and gave me 20 lashes a day. But this nobleman, having in 2 years' time been broke upon the wheel along with 30 more boyards, for some boils at court, I profited by that event. I fled. I traversed all Russia. I was a long time an innholder's servant at Riga, the same at Rostock, at Wismar, at Leipzig, at Kassel, at Utrecht, at Leyden, at The Hague, at Rotterdam. I waxed old in misery and disgrace, having only one half of my posteriors, and always remembering I was a pope's daughter. 100 times I was upon the point of killing myself, but still I loved life. This ridiculous foible is perhaps one of our most fatal characteristics. For is there anything more absurd than to wish to carry continually a burden which one can always throw down? To detest existence and yet to cling to one's existence? In belief, to caress the serpent which devours us, till he has eaten our very heart? In the different countries which it has been my lot to traverse, and the numerous inns where I have been servant, I have taken notice of a vast number of people who held their own existence in abhorrence, and yet I never knew of more than 8 who voluntarily put an end to their misery. 3 Negroes, 4 Englishmen, and a German professor named Robeck. I ended by being servant to the Jew Don Issachar, who placed me near your presence, my fair lady. I am determined to share your fate, and have been much more affected with your misfortunes than with my own. I would never even have spoken to you of my misfortunes, had you not piqued me a little, and if it were not customary to tell stories on board a ship in order to pass away the time. In short, Miss Cunegonde, I have had experience. I know the world. Therefore, I advise you to divert yourself, and prevail upon each passenger to tell his story. And if there be one of them all that has not cursed his life many a time, that has not frequently looked upon himself as the unhappiest of mortals, I give you leave to throw me head foremost into the sea. Chapter 13. How Candide was forced away from his fair Cunegonde and the old woman. The beautiful Cunegonde, having heard the old woman's history, paid her all the civilities due to a person of her rank and merit. She likewise accepted her proposal and engaged all the passengers, one after the other, to relate their adventures, and then both she and Candide allowed that the old woman was in the right. It is a great pity, said Candide, that the sage Pangloss was hanged contrary to custom at an auto-da-fe. He would tell us most amazing things in regard to the physical and moral evils that overspread earth and sea, and I should be able, with due respect, to make a few objections. While each passenger was recounting his story, the ship made her way. They landed at Buenos Aires. Cunegonde, Captain Candide, and the old woman waited on the governor. Don Fernando de Barra, y Figueroa, y Mascalenes, y Lampota, y Susa. This nobleman had stateliness becoming a person who bore so many names. He spoke to men with so noble a disdain, carried his nose so loftily, raised his voice so unmercifully, assumed so imprecious an air, and stalked with such intolerable pride that those who saluted him were strongly inclined to give him a good drubbing. Cunegonde appeared to him the most beautiful he had ever met. The first thing he did was to ask whether she was not the captain's wife. The manner in which he asked the question alarmed Candide. He durst not say she was his wife, because indeed she was not. Neither durst he say she was his sister, because it was not so. And although this obliging lie had been formerly much in favor among the ancients, and although it could be useful to the moderns, his soul was too pure to betray the truth. Miss Cunegonde, said he, is to do me the honor to marry me, and we beseech your excellency to deign to sanction our marriage. Don Fernando de Barra, y Figueroa, y Mascalenes, y Lampota, y Susa, turning up his mustachios, smiled mockingly, and ordered Captain Candide to go and review his company. Candide obeyed, and the governor remained alone with Miss Cunegonde. He declared his passion, protesting he would marry her the next day in the face of the church, or otherwise, just as should be agreeable to herself. Cunegonde asked a quarter of an hour to consider of it, to consult the old woman, and to take her resolution. The old woman spoke thus to Cunegonde: Miss, you have 72 quarterings, and not a farthing. It is now in your power to be wife to the greatest lord in South America, who has very beautiful mustachios. Is it for you to pique yourself upon invaluable fidelity? You have been ravished by Bulgarians, a Jew and an Inquisitor have enjoyed your favors. Misfortune gives sufficient excuse, I own, that if I were in your place, I should have no scruple in marrying the governor and in making the fortune of Captain Candide. While the old woman spoke with all the prudence which age and experience gave, a small ship entered the port, on board of which were an alcalde and his alguacils, and this was what had happened. As the old woman had shrewdly guessed, it was a Grey Friar who stole Cunegonde's money and jewels in the town of Badajoz. When she and Candide were escaping, the friar wanted to sell some of the diamonds to a jeweler. The jeweler knew them to be the Grand Inquisitors. The friar, before he was hanged, confessed he had stolen them. He described the persons and the route they had taken. The flight of Cunegonde and Candide was already known. They were traced to Cadiz. A vessel was immediately sent in pursuit of them. The vessel was already in the port of Buenos Aires. The report spread that the alcalde was going to land, and that he was in pursuit of the murders of my lord the Grand Inquisitor. The prudent old woman saw at once what was to be done. You cannot run away, said she to Cunegonde, and you have nothing to fear, for it was not you that killed my lord. Besides, the governor who loves you will not suffer you to be ill-treated. Therefore stay. She then ran immediately to Candide. Fly, said she, or in an hour you will be burnt. There was not a moment to lose, but how could he part from Cunegonde, and where could he flee for shelter? Chapter 14. How Candide and Cacambo were received by the Jesuits of Paraguay. Candide had brought such a valet with him from Cadiz, as one often meets with on the coasts of Spain and in the American colonies. He was a quarter Spaniard, born of a mongrel in Tucuman. He had been saint boy, sacristan, sailor, monk, peddler, soldier, and lackey. His name was Cacambo, and he loved his master, because his master was a very good man. He quickly saddled the two Andalusian horses. Come, master, let us follow the old woman's advice. Let us start, and run without looking behind us. Candide shed tears. Oh, my dear Cunegonde, must I leave you just at a time when the governor was going to sanction our nuptials? Cunegonde, brought to such a distance, what will become of you? She will do as well as she can, said Cacambo. The women are never at a loss. God provides for them. Let us run. Whither art thou carrying me? Where shall we go? What shall we do without Cunegonde? Said Candide. By Saint James of Compostela, said Cacambo. You are going to fight against the Jesuits. Let us go to fight for them. I know the road well. I will conduct you to their kingdom, where they will be charmed to have a captain that understands the Bulgarian exercise. You will make a prodigious fortune. If we cannot find our account in one world, we shall in another. It is a great pleasure to see and do new things. You have before been in Paraguay then, said Candide. Aye, sure, answered Cacambo. I was servant in the College of the Assumption, and I'm acquainted with the government of the good fathers as well as I'm with the streets of Cadiz. It is an admirable government. The kingdom is upwards of 300 leagues in diameter, and divided into 30 provinces. There the fathers possess all, and the people nothing. It is a masterpiece of reason and justice. For my part, I see nothing so divine as the fathers who dare make war upon the kings of Spain and Portugal, and in Europe confess those kings, who here kill Spaniards, and in Madrid send them to heaven. This delights me. Let us push forward. You are going to be the happiest of mortals. What pleasure will it be to those fathers to hear that a captain who knows the Bulgarian exercise has come to them? As soon as they reached the first barrier, Cacambo told the advanced guard that a captain wanted to speak with my lord the commandant. Notice was given to the main guard, and immediately a Paraguayan officer ran and laid himself at the feet of the commandant to impart this news to him. Candide and Cacambo were disarmed, and their two Andalusian horses seized. The strangers were introduced between two files of musketeers. The commandant was at the further end, with the three-cornered cap on his head, his gun tucked up, a sword by his side, and a spontoon in his hand. He beckoned, and straightway the newcomers were encompassed by 24 soldiers. A sergeant told them they must wait, that the commandant could not speak to them, and that the Reverend Father Provincial does not suffer any Spaniard to open his mouth but in his presence, or to stay above 3 hours in the province. And where is the Reverend Father Provincial? Said Cacambo. He is upon the parade just after celebrating Mass, answered the sergeant, and you cannot kiss his spurs till 3 hours hence. However, said Cacambo, the captain is not a Spaniard, but a German. He is ready to perish with hunger as well as myself. Cannot we have something for breakfast while we wait for his reverence? The sergeant went immediately to acquaint the commandant with what he had heard. God be praised, said the reverend commandant. Since he is a German, I may speak to him. Take him to my arbor. Candide was at once conducted to a beautiful summer house, ornamented with a very pretty colonnade of green and gold marble, and with trellises enclosing paroquets, hummingbirds, flybirds, guinea hens, and all other rare birds. An excellent breakfast was provided in vessels of gold, and while the Paraguayans were eating maize out of wooden dishes, in the open fields and exposed to the heat of sun, the Reverend Father Commandant retired to his arbor. He was a very handsome young man, with a full face, white skin but high in color. He had an arched eyebrow, a lively eye, red ears, vermilion lips, a bold air, but such a boldness as neither belonged to a Spaniard nor a Jesuit. They returned their arms to Candide and Cacambo, and also the two Andalusian horses, to whom Cacambo gave some oats to eat just by the arbor, having an eye upon them all the while for fear of a surprise. Candide first kissed the hem of the commandant's robe, then they sat down to table. "You are then a German?" said the Jesuit to him in that language. "Yes, Reverend Father," answered Candide. As they pronounced these words, they looked at each other with great amazement, and with such an emotion as they could not conceal. "And from what part of Germany do you come?" said the Jesuit. "I am from the dirty province of Westphalia," answered Candide. "I was born in the castle of Thunder Ten Tronckh." "Oh, heaven! Is it possible?" cried the commandant. "What a miracle!" cried Candide. "Is it really you?" said the commandant. "It is not possible," said Candide. They drew back, they embraced, they shed rivulets of tears. "What? Is it you, Reverend Father? You, the brother of the fair Cunegonde? You, that was slain by the Bulgarians? You, the Baron's son? You, a Jesuit in Paraguay? I must confess this is a strange world that we live in. Oh, Pangloss, Pangloss, how glad you would be if you had not been hanged." The commandant sent away the Negro slaves and the Paraguayans, who served them with liquors in goblets of rock crystal. He thanked God and Saint Ignatius 1,000 times. He clasped Candide in his arms, and their faces were all bathed with tears. "You will be more surprised, more affected, and transported," said Candide, "when I tell you that Cunegonde, your sister, whom you believe to have been ripped open, is in perfect health." "Where?" "In your neighborhood, with the governor of Buenos Aires, and I was going to fight against you." Every word which they uttered in this long conversation but added wonder to wonder. Their souls fluttered on their tongues, listened in their ears, and sparkled in their eyes. As they were Germans, they sat a good while at table, waiting for the Reverend Father Provincial, and the commandant spoke to his dear Candide as follows. Chapter 15. How Candide killed the brother of his dear Cunegonde. I shall have ever present to my memory the dreadful day on which I saw my father and mother killed and my sister ravished. When the Bulgarians retired, my dear sister could not be found, but my mother, my father, and myself, with 2 maidservants and 3 little boys, all of whom had been slain, were put in a hearse, to be conveyed for interment to a chapel belonging to the Jesuits. Within 2 leagues of our family seat, a Jesuit sprinkled us with some holy water. It was horribly salt. A few drops of it fell into my eyes. The father perceived that my eyelids stirred a little. He put his hand upon my heart and felt it beat. I received assistance, and at the end of 3 weeks I recovered. You know, my dear Candide, I was very pretty, but I grew much prettier, and the Reverend Father Didre, superior of that house, conceived the tenderest friendship for me. He gave me the habit of the order. Some years after I was sent to Rome, the Father General needed new levies of young German Jesuits. The sovereigns of Paraguay admit as few Spanish Jesuits as possible. They prefer those of other nations as being more subordinate to their commands. I was judged fit by the Reverend Father General to go and work in this vineyard. We set out, a Pole, a Terrellist, and myself. Upon my arrival, I was honored with a subdeaconship and a lieutenancy. I am today colonel and priest. We shall give a warm reception to the King of Spain's troop. I will answer for it that they shall be excommunicated and well beaten. Providence sends you here to assist us. But is it indeed true that my dear sister Cunegonde is in the neighborhood with Governor of Buenos Aires? Candide assured him on oath that nothing was more true, and their tears began afresh. The Baron could not refrain from embracing Candide. He called him his brother, his savior. Ah, perhaps, said he, we shall together, my dear Candide, enter the town as conquerors and recover my sister Cunegonde. That is all I want, said Candide, for I intended to marry her, and I still hope to do so. You insolent, replied the Baron. Would you have the impudence to marry my sister, who has 72 quarterings? I find thou hast the most consummated effrontery to dare to mention so presumptuous a design. Candide, petrified at this speech, made answer, Reverend Father, all the quarterings in the world signify nothing. I rescued your sister from the armies of a Jew and of an inquisitor. She has great obligations to me. She wishes to marry me. Master Pangloss always told me that all men are equal, and certainly I will marry her. We shall see that, thou scoundrel, said the Jesuit Baron de Thunder-Ten-Tronckh, and that instant struck him across the face with the flat of his sword. Candide in an instant drew his rapier and plunged it up to the hilt in the Jesuit's belly, but in pulling it out reeking hot, he burst into tears. Good God, said he, I've killed my old master, my friend, my brother-in-law. I am the best-natured creature in the world, and yet I have already killed 3 men, and of these 3, 2 were priests. Cacambo, who stood sentry by the door of the arbor, ran to him. We have nothing more for it than to sell our lives as dearly as we can, said his master to him. Without doubt, someone will soon enter the arbor, and we must die sword in hand. Cacambo, who had been in a great many scrapes in his lifetime, did not lose his head. He took the Baron's Jesuit habit, put it on Candide, gave him the square cap, and made him mount on horseback. All this was done in the twinkling of an eye. Let us gapple fast, master. Everybody will take you for a Jesuit, going to give directions to your men, and we shall have passed the frontiers before they will be able to overtake us. He flew as he spoke these words, crying out loud in Spanish, make way, for the Reverend Father Colonel.